Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I start with a point of consensus and echo the comments of Douglas Ross in relation to Glenn Campbell. It's fantastic to see him back on his feet, and we wish him and all his family all of the best. And now there are undoubtedly some things that we would welcome and support in today's programme for government. The acceptance of Scottish Labour's long-standing campaign to increase pay for social care staff to £12 is welcome. We'd like to see the pathway to the fight for 15. We of course support the proposals on empty homes and second homes, even though we believe that could go further and be stronger. And we of course support the commitment to criminalise misogyny, as well as support those the proposals he set out to impose support those impacted by miscarriage. We also support the intention to improve partnership with business and work on an industrial strategy, but this must be more than rhetoric. Business will judge the government on delivery, not on bland promises. But, Deputy Presiding Officer, the First Minister can't hide from reality. This is an SNP government that has lost its way, that has no clear direction, no sense of purpose and no central mission. And they also can't escape from the fact that they are trying to clear a mess of their own making. 16 years of incompetence and financial mismanagement. Because the truth is, Scotland needed a programme for government to match the scale of the twin crises hitting Scots: a cost-of-living crisis and an NHS crisis. It took the First Minister 22 minutes to even mention our National Health Service. Because this package today isn't good enough, it isn't bold enough, and it won't do enough to confront those challenges. Families needed a government that was relentlessly focused on reducing the burdens on their household incomes in the middle of a cost-of-living crisis. But instead they get a government that will hit them with council tax and income tax rises. Scots also needed a clear plan to bring down waiting times and reduce waiting lists to confront the NHS crisis. Instead, too many of them are left waiting in pain or being pushed further into debt by being forced to go private. We needed a new vision and a meaningful strategy to fix the long underlying failure which has only made responding to these twin crises harder: a plan to grow Scotland's economy. But instead, what have we seen over the summer? Over the summer, you've seen a government lurch from one scandal to the next, whether it's uncertainty on the party's finances, indulgent spending on credit cards at the taxpayer's expense, or division on the backbenches from those inside the SNP who are clearly uncomfortable with the direction of travel, or consent perhaps that there's no direction at all from this First Minister and this SNP government. And the First Minister himself admitted that today was a bit of a relaunch and that things had to go well. But I've lost count of the number of false starts and rebrands the First Minister has attempted in the last 6 months. Because when it comes to the substance, as we've seen today, there may be an attempt to change the headline, but it can't hide a more difficult truth. The First Minister was a continuity candidate who is now left painting the windows on a government responsible for 16 years of failure.
First Minister.
Anna Sarwar calls me the continuity candidate. It would be helpful if he could hold on to one principle without U-turning over the course of a summer, Presiding Officer. We saw a summer of U-turns from Labour. Anna Sarwar now supporting the two-child limit, the bedroom tax, the rape clause. Isn't the truth that the people of Scotland and the SNP have an anti-poverty, pro-growth government, whereas what they have with Scottish Labour is simply a party that will do what head office tells them to do?
Anna Sarwar, I can give you the time back.
I'm actually really pleased the First Minister made that intervention, because he would rather attack a party that's not been in government rather than look at his record in government. 1 in 4 children in poverty on the SNP's watch. Just last week, record levels of homelessness applications, record levels of children in temporary accommodation. Silence on the SNP backbenches now when it comes to looking at their own record in government. So enough of the spin, enough of the cheap headlines, enough of blaming somebody else, and instead focus on your failure as a government. And again, they can laugh if they like. The Scottish people are going to get their chance to make their judgment on this SNP government, and I can't wait for them to make that judgment. As will happen in Rutherglen and Hamilton West really soon. But, Presiding Officer, in the last 12 months, so instead of a reset, today's statement reveals a tired government, out of energy, without focus, and now too distracted by internal squabbling to manage more than a tinkering around the edges. Presiding Officer, in the last 12 months, There has been a lot of superficial change at the top of the Scottish Government, but while the ferry master might have changed, the boat still isn't seaworthy. It is just another tired and rehashed programme from a party that has clearly run out of ideas. And nowhere is that clearer than our National Health Service. A former Health Secretary waiting 22 minutes to talk about our National Health Service. Because across Scotland, 820,000 people are languishing on NHS waiting lists. We are now 2 years on from when the then Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, published his NHS recovery plan. It promised to end long waits, grow the economy, create more capacity, but the experience for patients and staff has been the opposite. 1 in 7 Scots on an NHS waiting list. Over 5,600 nursing and midwifery vacancies, and consultant vacancies up too. This is what we've come to expect from Humza Yousaf and this SNP government. Big announcements to get the headline, but not implement when actually in government. Promises to end delayed discharge back in 2015, never met, and now costing the NHS £190 million a year. Commitments to end waits of over a year, lying in tatters, while 77,500 Scots wait more than 12 months for tests, appointments and treatments. And most shockingly of all, cancer treatment targets missed repeatedly since 2012. The failure to restore our NHS, to be frank, Presiding Officer, is a shameful failure. A catch-up plan should mean waiting lists coming down, not going up. The Scottish Labour have repeatedly called for a real NHS recovery, one that ends the cuts to primary care and prioritises mental health support that is being made available in every GP practice and surgery, one that delivers a proper catch-up in cancer with a focus on faster diagnosis and an end to long waits for treatment, a recovery that prioritises community care and paying social care staff properly, because that's how we will end delayed discharge and improve hospital capacity, and a real workforce plan that actually retains the skills and knowledge of experienced staff and increases the number of doctors, nurses and medical professionals in training. We could have seen this in the programme from the First Minister today if he had brought forward a new NHS recovery plan that gets services back on track and actually deals with the backlogs in diagnostics and in care. Instead, we've seen the repeated old promises and announcements that are actually delays of work that was already promised years ago. And precious little to resolve either the waiting list, diagnostic delays and workforce shortages, which have left our much-loved NHS on its knees. And just as it was 2 years ago, this programme for government is just more rhetoric without any reality and no plan to reverse the crisis in our NHS. The utter lack of ambition couldn't be clearer in that gap between rhetoric and reality of the SNP's plans, not just on the NHS, but also their plans on economic growth and jobs too. Because, Presiding Officer, we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis. Families across this country are facing far too many hardships. Right now, there are mothers in Scotland who are skipping meals in order to feed their children. That is the heartbreaking reality of, yes, Tory economic incompetence and failure, but of also SNP inaction and incompetence too. The Tories crashed the economy and caused the hikes in interest rates, which are causing so much misery on households here. But the SNP haven't done enough to help in Scotland. And it isn't just Labour saying that. A majority of Scots don't trust the SNP to act in Scotland's interests on the cost of living. Now, Labour asked the Scottish Government to help with the cost of commuting by following examples from elsewhere to cap bus fares and freeze the cost of rail travel. We called for the excess cash reserves of Scottish Water to be repurposed as a £100 water bill rebate, and we set out proposals for a mortgage rescue scheme to ensure no one lost their home because of the Tory economic chaos. But each time the SNP ignored our asks, deciding instead to exacerbate the pressures on households by proposing tax hikes. If the First Minister really thinks that someone earning £28,000 in our country is somehow well off and not struggling right now, and so can pay higher taxes, then he is completely and utterly deluded to the reality facing households across the country. This is a First Minister who keeps saying, you've heard already today, Deputy Presiding Officer, that tackling poverty is a central mission of his government. Well, look at his record. 1 in 4 children living in poverty in Scotland. Homelessness applications have skyrocketed to the highest record ever. Over 9,500 children are living in temporary accommodation, again the highest number ever. And just today it was revealed that 3 members of the Scottish Government's Poverty and Inequality Commission have resigned, to hardly a glowing advert for the First Minister and his announcements today. Because, Presiding Officer, the SNP has lost its way. In 16 years they have squandered the legacy of the last Labour government, which lifted 1 million children out of poverty. They can laugh at lifting 1 million children out of poverty if they like. Both of Scotland's governments are distracted, divided and failing to deliver. Only Scottish Labour offers a fresh start and real solutions. As well as our proposals to help households with the cost of living, Labour has a plan to cut bills by up to £1,400, invest in Scotland's and the UK's renewable potential, deliver energy security, clean power and a publicly owned energy company headquartered here in Scotland, whilst also insulating 1.4 million homes. Making the most of these will require a partnership between industry and government so we can build a thriving economy. But today we've had a speech laden with rhetoric that is light on practical delivery. Deputy Presiding Officer, we've had a Scottish Parliament now for 24 years. And I think it's right that many have viewed our Parliament as a social policy Parliament. But it also hasn't been strong enough on economic policy. And that has left Scottish workers being let down, workers facing the pinch and weakening the potential of our growth. And that's why we have got to put economic strategy, economic growth, as well as social policy at the heart of this Parliament if we are going to confront both the cost of living crisis and the cost of doing business crisis as well. Now, we heard about the reset of business. In the last year, the ministers have shelved several plans which businesses have said are damaging for the economy. HPMAs, a ban on advertising of Scotland's breweries and distilleries, and of course the wasted money on the deposit return scheme. The question is, how many ideas does the First Minister think will end up on the same scrap here, costing the taxpayers millions from his announcements today? And that's why we stand ready to put economic growth at the heart of our politics again. We stand ready to deliver a model industrial strategy that will get people around the table and remove barriers to investment. We stand ready to deliver a green prosperity plan that will put investment at the heart of delivering clean energy superpower. And we stand ready to make sure every part of our community benefits from the benefits of a Labour government across our country. And every community across our country deserves better. They've been let down far too long, right now by 2 failing governments, a morally bankrupt Tory government and a financially illiterate and incompetent SNP government. We deserve better than both of them. We deserve better than the cruel and out-of-touch Tories, and we deserve better than a divided and distracted SNP. Scottish Labour now offers that alternative. Only Labour can boot the Tories out of number 10. Only Labour can bring our country together and bring about change for people across our country. Only Labour can tackle the cost of living crisis and save our NHS. Only Labour believes our country's best days lie ahead. It's clear the public believe it's time for change. We're ready to deliver the change Scotland needs.